The night was supposed to be dazzling, but for one woman it turned into a wound that cut deeper than any knife. Under the blinding chandeliers of New York's most prestigious gala, billionaire Adrian Colton strutted in with a woman half his wife's age, his arm draped around her waist as though she were the crown jewel of his empire. The cameras flashed, journalists scribbled, and whispers rippled like fire through the ballroom. He smiled with the arrogance of a man who thought the world belonged to him. But at home, his pregnant wife Elena Moore was fighting back tears, her hands trembling as she clutched her belly. Only hours earlier, she had ironed his tuxedo with care, believing he was headed to an important board meeting. She kissed him goodbye, hopeful that he might return in time to share dinner. Instead, she saw the betrayal unfold in real time, live-streamed on society pages and gossip channels. Her husband was not at a meeting. He was parading his mistress before the very world they once ruled together. Elena had sacrificed everything for this man. Her career as a promising fashion designer, her independence, her voice. She gave up her dreams to support his rise, choosing love over ambition. And now, at the very moment she carried his child, he discarded her like yesterday's news. The pain was unbearable, yet the humiliation was worse. Friends texted condolences, tabloids labeled her the pitiful wife, and in one cruel headline a gossip column mocked Colton's future, not his past. The mistress, Cassandra Lee, looked radiant in a crimson gown, her smile taunting, her hand resting boldly on Adrian's chest. She leaned in, whispering something that made him laugh loudly, echoing through the ballroom. He reveled in the spectacle. He wanted Elena to see, to feel small, to understand that he no longer cared who knew about his betrayal. At that exact moment, Elena's world broke into shards. She was 6 months pregnant, exhausted, and terrified about her future. The man she once trusted with her entire heart was showing the world that she no longer mattered. Yet deep within her, something stirred. It wasn't just anger. It was the awakening of a strength she had buried for years. She would not be silent. She would not be destroyed. As the cameras continued to capture Adrian's proud display, Elena sat alone in their vast, empty penthouse, staring at the glow of the city lights. Her tears had dried, replaced by something far more dangerous: resolve. The world might see her as broken, but soon they would learn the truth. Adrian thought he was writing her ending, but what he had really done was light the fire for her greatest beginning. Because this story wasn't about a man who betrayed his wife. It was about a woman who would rise from the ashes of humiliation to reclaim her power, her dignity, and her future. And one day soon, when she stood tall in front of the very crowd that once pitied her, the applause would belong not to him, but to her. And no one, not Adrian, not Cassandra, not the glittering crowd, was prepared for the storm Elena was about to unleash. Before the betrayal, Elena Moore was not just a wife. She was a dreamer, a creator, a woman who once believed in magic, woven through fabric and stitches. Born in a quiet neighborhood in Brooklyn, she grew up watching her mother sew dresses late into the night to earn extra income. While other kids played with dolls, Elena played with fabric scraps, turning them into miniature gowns for her paper cutout models. By the time she was in high school, she had already designed her first collection, a handful of dresses stitched from second-hand cloth, but bursting with originality. Her teachers called her a prodigy. She earned a scholarship to the prestigious Parsons School of Design. There, she flourished. Professors praised her eye for detail, her ability to combine modern minimalism with emotional storytelling through clothes. Elena doesn't just design fashion, one mentor once said. She designs feelings. She had dreams of launching her own label, dreams that made her work until dawn sketching patterns, fueled by instant coffee and unshakable determination. Then Adrian Colton walked into her life. He was older, confident, dazzling in a way that made her heart stumble. He wasn't a billionaire yet, but his ambition radiated like a storm. He saw in Elena not just beauty but loyalty, and for a young woman who had grown up craving stability, that was intoxicating. When he told her he could build an empire and wanted her by his side, she believed him. She believed so strongly that she put her career on pause, choosing to be the supportive wife, the foundation on which his empire could rise. For years, Elena lived quietly in Adrian's shadow. She gave up job offers from major fashion houses, She stopped attending galas where designers mingled, stopped showing her sketches, even stopped talking about her dreams. Instead, she devoted herself to their home, to being the perfect hostess, the perfect wife. When she found out she was pregnant, she thought it was the missing piece of happiness they both needed. She imagined building a family, filling their cold penthouse with warmth. But as her belly grew, Adrian grew distant. He spent more nights at business dinners, more weekends away on work trips. When Elena tried to reach for him, he brushed her aside with excuses. "You worry too much. This is how business works," he'd say. But in her heart, she knew. She just didn't want to face it. Elena's weakness was her hope. She clung to the image of the man she had married, the man who once whispered promises into her hair. She convinced herself he would come back to her, that once the baby arrived, everything would change. She told herself that the sacrifices she had made, the career she abandoned, the years she lost, were not in vain. And yet, reality was merciless. On the very nights she battled nausea and sleeplessness, he was laughing in champagne-soaked rooms with another woman. While she carefully stitched tiny baby clothes in their penthouse, he was gifting jewelry to his mistress. The world saw her as the quiet, fragile wife, and she began to believe it too. But there was something no one, not even Adrian, understood. Elena may have buried her dreams, but she had never destroyed them. The fire inside her was only sleeping, waiting for the spark. And that spark, cruel as it was, had come from betrayal. The woman Adrian thought was weak was about to remember who she really was. And once Elena remembered her true self, nothing and no one could stop her. New York City had always been a stage for power. Its glittering skyline told stories of ambition, betrayal, and rebirth. At the heart of it all stood the Bright Futures Gala, an annual event where billionaires competed not with stocks or deals, but with who could sparkle the brightest. That year, the ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was transformed into a kingdom of wealth. Golden chandeliers dripped light across polished marble floors, waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne, and a string quartet filled the air with Mozart. It was supposed to be a night of generosity, a fundraiser for children's education. Instead, it became the scene of Adrian Colton's most shameless act. Dressed in a custom Armani tuxedo, Adrian walked in with Cassandra Lee on his arm. Cameras flashed, capturing every second of the betrayal. Cassandra wore a scarlet gown that seemed to challenge the room itself. Guests gasped, whispered, and turned their heads. Everyone knew Adrian was married. Everyone knew Elena was at home, expecting his child. Yet there he was, proud and unashamed, treating the gala like his personal theater. The atmosphere was suffocating in its irony. The chandeliers sparkled, but the whispers were cruel. "Poor Elena," one woman hissed behind her fan. "Imagine being left while pregnant." Another smirked. "He finally upgraded. She never fit in anyway." Gossip spread like wildfire, burning Elena's name long before she even knew the full extent of the humiliation. Meanwhile, across the city, their penthouse loomed over Manhattan like a glass fortress. From the outside, it was perfection. Floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, a rooftop garden no one ever used. But inside, it was cold. The silence of the rooms was deafening, broken only by the ticking of a designer clock on the wall. Elena sat alone on a velvet sofa, her phone glowing with endless updates about the gala. Each picture, each headline was another knife in her chest. The penthouse had never felt like home. It was Adrian's monument to himself, decorated by professionals, polished for the press, but void of warmth. Elena remembered the countless nights she had tried to fill it with life, cooking dinners, placing flowers on the tables, humming while sketching designs, but Adrian always came home too late, too tired, or too distracted. Now, as she stared at the empty dining room, she realized the house had never belonged to her. It had belonged to his ego. The contrast between the two settings could not have been sharper. At the gala, Adrian basked in applause, laughter, and the envy of his peers. At the penthouse, Elena battled loneliness, fear, and betrayal. He had the world's spotlight while she had only shadows, and yet in those shadows, something powerful was awakening. That night, as fireworks lit the sky outside, the city seemed to mock her. But Elena whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "This will not be the end of my story." The chandeliers could blind, the gossip could sting, but she still had her heart, her child, and a talent the world had forgotten. The gala would be remembered for Adrian's arrogance, yes. But soon, another gala, another stage, would be remembered for Elena's rise. And when that day came, the same city that pitied her would stand and applaud her name. Adrian Colton had always thrived on power. To the world, he was the perfect image of a self-made billionaire, sharp, charming, untouchable. He built his empire on ruthless ambition, swallowing small tech firms, reshaping markets, and manipulating every opportunity that came his way. But behind the polished smile and expensive tuxedos lived a man who craved validation more than love. Success wasn't enough for Adrian. He needed to flaunt it, to humiliate others, to feel larger by making someone else feel small. Cassandra Lee was the newest prize in his collection. At 26, she was beautiful in the kind of way that demanded attention. Long black hair, flawless skin, and a figure sculpted for red carpets. She knew exactly how to use her looks. She had once been his assistant, taking notes in meetings, fetching coffee, quietly listening while Adrian boasted about closing billion-dollar deals. Slowly, she learned what pleased him, obedience mixed with admiration. And Adrian, intoxicated by her youthful energy and cunning flattery, let her climb closer and closer until she was no longer just an assistant. At the gala, they were inseparable. Adrian introduced her to board members as though she were already his wife. He laughed too loudly at her jokes, placed his hand too firmly at her waist, and whispered into her ear with a tenderness he no longer gave Elena. Cassandra played her part flawlessly, flashing smiles, pretending to be overwhelmed by the glamorous world she now belonged to. But deep down, she wasn't just in love with Adrian, she was in love with his empire. Adrian's arrogance blinded him to the damage he was causing. He thought parading Cassandra in front of New York's elite would make him appear powerful, untouchable. What he didn't realize was that every whisper, every raised eyebrow was carving cracks into his carefully crafted image. Investors wondered if he had lost discipline. Colleagues whispered about his judgment. Yet Adrian dismissed it all. "Let them talk," he told Cassandra as they clinked glasses of champagne. "They wish they were me." Cassandra smirked, but she had her own agenda. She wasn't content with being just the mistress. She wanted Adrian's name, his ring, his fortune. She wanted to erase Elena completely. To her, Elena was nothing but a shadow, weak, pitiful, forgotten. Cassandra had convinced herself that if Adrian discarded his wife once, he could erase her forever. She underestimated Elena's quiet strength, and that miscalculation would prove fatal to her plans. Back at the penthouse, Adrian had grown crueler over the months. He dismissed Elena's questions with sharp words. "Stop acting like a child," he'd sneer whenever she asked where he had been. When she showed him the tiny clothes she had sewn for their unborn baby, he shrugged. "We can buy better ones. Don't waste your time." When she cried, he told her she was being dramatic. In his eyes, Elena had become invisible. That was his greatest mistake. Because the woman he dismissed as fragile was about to rise in a way that neither he nor Cassandra could imagine. For now, though, Adrian believed he was untouchable. He thought the mistress at his side made him appear younger, more powerful. He thought Elena was finished. He thought betrayal had no consequences. But the empire he was so proud of was about to tremble, and the woman he underestimated was about to become his greatest downfall. The whispers of betrayal had been enough to wound her, but the moment of public humiliation carved scars Elena thought she would never heal from. It happened 3 days after the gala, at what should have been an ordinary board luncheon for Colton Industries. Elena had once been welcomed there as Adrian's wife, the quiet woman who stood at his side while he closed deals. Now her invitation had come more out of pity than respect, and she almost didn't go. But something in her heart told her she needed to face the truth head on, no matter how painful. She arrived in a simple navy dress, her baby bump unmistakable, her hair tied back in a neat bun. She carried a folder of sketches in her bag, not because she planned to show them, but because she needed something of herself close to her. As she stepped into the glittering banquet hall, the air changed. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, conversations dropped to hushed tones. Elena knew the looks. They were the same ones women used when they smelled blood in the water. And then she saw him. Adrian stood near the podium, a glass of champagne in hand, his arm proudly around Cassandra. She wasn't just there as a date this time. She was seated in the chair that used to be Elena's, the chair meant for the wife. Cassandra's laughter rang out, shrill and cutting, as if mocking Elena from across the room. Adrian spotted her, and for a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Was it guilt? Shame? No, it was annoyance. He walked over slowly, dragging Cassandra with him, and addressed her in front of the board members. "Elena," he said, his tone cold and rehearsed, "I didn't expect you here. You should be at home resting." The words cut deeper than knives. Resting. As if she were some fragile relic, unwanted and unnecessary. She tried to hold her ground, whispering, "I came to support you, Adrian." But Cassandra leaned in with a smirk, her perfume overpowering, and added, "Don't worry, Elena. I'll take care of him." The room erupted with awkward coughs and forced laughter. Board members looked at their shoes. No one defended her. No one stopped the cruelty unfolding in plain sight. Elena felt her cheeks burn, tears threatening to spill, but she refused to cry in front of them. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, reminding herself that she still existed, that she was more than their pity. Then came the final blow. Adrian raised his glass, tapping it for silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I'd like you to meet Cassandra Lee. She will be joining us as the new face of Colton Industries' philanthropic division." He kissed Cassandra's cheek as flashes from phones and cameras lit the room. Elena stood frozen. The division he spoke of had been her project, her idea, the one thing she had built with him. Now it was being handed to his mistress like a party favor. The humiliation was complete. Her identity as his partner, her role as his wife, even her contributions to his empire, all erased in one public declaration. But as the applause rang hollow around her, Elena realized something extraordinary. The very moment meant to destroy her had ignited something fierce inside her. Betrayal had taken everything, but it had also stripped her fear. She turned and walked out of the room, her back straight, her heart heavy but alive with a new resolve. What Adrian thought was her ending was in truth only the beginning of her revenge. That night, Elena returned to the penthouse in silence. The city lights glittered outside the windows, but they felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. She dropped her bag onto the marble floor and sank into the sofa, her body trembling, her chest heavy with the weight of humiliation. For the first time in her life, she truly felt invisible, like a shadow passing through rooms that once belonged to her. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Articles, gossip posts, social media comments, each one sharper than the last. Cassandra shines as Colton's new queen, poor wife abandoned while pregnant. Elena Moore, out of place in a billionaire's world. She tried to put the phone away, but the voices clung to her like chains. She curled into herself, hugging her belly, whispering apologies to the child inside. "I'm so sorry," she cried, her voice cracking. "I wanted you to have a father. I wanted us to be a family." The tears came in waves, drowning her strength. Hours passed. She tried to eat but couldn't swallow. She tried to sleep, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's arm around Cassandra, saw the smirk on her face, saw the world clapping while her own life shattered. The pain was not just betrayal, it was erasure. It was the cruel feeling of being replaced before she was even gone. By midnight, she stumbled into the nursery she had started to prepare. Tiny clothes she had sewn herself hung neatly on small wooden hangers. A crib stood in the corner, covered with a quilt she had stitched by hand, each square carrying a memory, a piece of her hope. She touched the fabric and broke down again, sliding to the floor. "What am I going to do?" she whispered. "How will I raise you? How will we survive?" Her mind spiraled. She thought of leaving the city, disappearing into some small town where no one knew her name. She thought of retreating forever, letting Adrian and Cassandra have their empire while she lived in silence. For a brief, terrifying moment, she even thought of giving up completely, of surrendering to the darkness that pressed against her chest. But then, something unexpected happened. The baby kicked. A small, sudden movement from inside her womb, gentle yet powerful. Elena froze, tears still streaming, her hand pressed against her belly. The baby kicked again, as if reminding her, "I'm here. You're not alone." In that fragile moment, the despair cracked. She cried harder, but the tears felt different, less like drowning, more like cleansing. She whispered, okay, I hear you. I'll keep fighting, for you." Still, the night dragged on. She lay on the nursery floor until dawn, her body aching, her eyes swollen from crying. The city woke outside, taxis honking, people rushing to work, life moving forward without her. For Elena, time had stopped. But deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, a tiny ember of strength had been lit. This was her lowest point, the moment where she nearly broke completely, and yet it was also the moment where survival whispered louder than surrender. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but Elena would rise again, and when she did, the world that laughed at her would be forced to listen. Morning sunlight poured through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the cold marble floors. Elena dragged herself from the nursery, her body heavy from a night of crying, her spirit fractured. She expected nothing from the day, just more headlines mocking her, more silence from Adrian. But fate had a way of planting miracles in the darkest soil. It began with a knock at the door. Elena hesitated, wiping her swollen eyes before opening it. Standing there was Marcus Blackwell, one of New York's most elusive figures in the fashion industry. He wasn't just any designer, he was a billionaire mogul who had built an empire out of couture. His name commanded respect across Paris, Milan, and New York. Elena had met him once, years ago, when she was still a student at Parsons. Back then, he'd been a guest critic at her senior showcase. He'd stopped at her collection, lingered longer than expected, and whispered, "You have something rare. Don't waste it." Now here he was, standing in her doorway with eyes that seemed to see through her brokenness. "Elena," he said quietly, "you look like hell, but I hear you've been through it." Her first instinct was embarrassment. She wanted to shut the door, to hide her swollen belly, her trembling hands, her shame. But Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped inside as if he belonged there, his gaze scanning the lifeless penthouse. Then he noticed the folder of sketches she had left on the sofa. He picked it up, flipping through the pages. "These are yours?" he asked. Elena hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, they're nothing, just old drawings." "Nothing?" His tone sharpened. "This is vision. This is fire. You're sitting here drowning in pity while the world doesn't even know the brilliance you're hiding." Her eyes welled with tears. "I gave it all up. Adrian, he wanted me at home. He didn't want me designing, and now it's too late." Marcus set the sketches down firmly. "It's not too late. You're still alive. You're still breathing. And if you're smart, you'll stop letting that man define you. You want revenge? You want dignity? Then show the world who Elena Moore really is. Launch your own line. Take back everything he stole from you." The words landed like thunder in her chest. Launch her own line. It sounded impossible, laughable even. She was 6 months pregnant, broke and broken-hearted. But Marcus's eyes burned with conviction, as if he saw something in her that she couldn't yet see in herself. Still trembling, Elena whispered, "I can't do it alone." "You won't," Marcus replied. "I'll help you. I'll give you a studio, a team, whatever you need, but the vision has to come from you. The courage has to come from you." For the first time in months, Elena felt her heart beat with something other than despair. Could it be possible? Could she rise again, not as Adrian's discarded wife, but as her own woman? She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of life inside her. Maybe this was her chance, not just for survival, but for rebirth. Marcus leaned closer, his voice a low promise. "Remember this, Elena, the best revenge isn't tears, it's success. Make him watch as the world applauds you." And in that instant, the broken wife became a woman on the edge of transformation. The storm inside her was no longer grief, it was the beginning of fire. The following week marked a turning point in Elena's life. For days she had stared at Marcus's words echoing in her mind. The best revenge isn't tears, it's success. At first they felt too heavy to carry. She was still exhausted, still bruised from betrayal. But as she sat in the nursery, surrounded by half-finished baby clothes, a new thought pushed its way into her heart. What if he was right? What if I could rise again? Elena began with the simplest act, unpacking her old sewing machine from the storage closet. Dust clung to its corners, a silent reminder of the years it had been forgotten. She set it on the dining table and ran her hands over the familiar surface. Memories came flooding back. Nights in her student dorm sketching collections, mornings at fashion school critiqued by professors, the rush of fabric between her fingers. That life had felt like it belonged to someone else. Now, she was determined to make it hers again. The first few stitches were shaky. Her hands trembled, her eyes blurred with tears of fatigue. But with each press of the pedal, each hum of the machine, something inside her came alive again. She started small. A dress for herself, loose enough to fit her pregnancy, elegant enough to remind her she was more than just a discarded wife. When she tried it on, standing in front of the mirror, she didn't see pity. She saw possibility. Marcus visited often, checking on her progress. He never offered pity, only blunt honesty. "That seam is crooked. Do it again," he'd say, tossing a piece of fabric back at her. At first she bristled, embarrassed, but soon she realized his criticism wasn't cruelty. It was belief. He pushed her because he knew she could do better. By the end of the second week, Elena had filled the penthouse dining room with sketches, fabric swatches, and half-finished garments. For the first time since Adrian's betrayal, the silence of the apartment wasn't crushing, it was filled with the rhythm of creation. Still, the journey was far from easy. Elena battled morning sickness, swollen ankles, and sleepless nights. There were moments she wanted to quit, moments she broke down in tears at the machine. But every time, she placed her hand on her belly and whispered to her unborn child, "We're doing this together. I promise you, we will not be defeated." Word spread quietly. A former classmate from Parsons dropped by to help, moved by Elena's determination. Soon, 2 more old friends joined, offering their skills in exchange for nothing but loyalty. A small team began to form around her, not out of money or obligation, but out of belief in who she was. Elena chose a name for her line, Phoenix Ware. It symbolized rebirth, fire from ashes, strength born out of betrayal. Every sketch she created carried that theme. Flowing gowns with bold cuts, maternity wear that celebrated women instead of hiding them, designs that spoke of resilience. Each stitch was a declaration. I am not broken. I am rising. One evening, as she stood in front of her designs pinned across the walls, Marcus entered quietly. He studied the pieces, his lips curving into the smallest of smiles. "Now you look like yourself again," he said. For the first time in months, Elena smiled back. She didn't feel like Adrian's discarded wife anymore. She felt like Elena Moore, designer, mother, survivor. And as the city outside continued to gossip about her downfall, she was secretly preparing the beginning of her triumph. The city buzzed with rumors of Adrian Colton's glamorous new life, but in the shadows, Elena Moore was weaving her own future. By now, the dining room of the penthouse had transformed into a studio. Bolts of fabric leaned against the walls, sketches littered the floor, and mannequins stood like silent witnesses, draped in pieces of her rebirth. Every day began with swollen ankles, morning nausea and exhaustion. But every night ended with another garment finished, another step closer to freedom. Marcus kept his promise. He introduced Elena to a small but loyal network of seamstresses and interns who admired her courage. They worked quietly, without fanfare, because secrecy was vital. If Adrian caught wind of what she was doing, he would try to crush it before it bloomed. Elena knew him too well. His ego couldn't survive her success. Her collection grew piece by piece. There were gowns in bold reds and golds, inspired by fire. There were sleek maternity designs that redefined what it meant to be a mother, not hidden, but powerful. Each creation was stitched with her story, betrayal, heartbreak, and the determination to rise anyway. She called the line Reborn. The more she worked, the more her confidence returned. Yet with confidence came fear. Late at night, doubts crept into her mind. What if no one cares? What if I humiliate myself again? What if Adrian is right and I am nothing without him? She would pace the penthouse, staring at the skyline, her heart racing. Then, as always, her baby would kick, grounding her. "For us," she whispered, "I have to do this." Marcus urged her to take the next step. A show. Not a grand spectacle at Fashion Week, not yet, but something intimate, exclusive, powerful enough to ignite whispers in the right rooms. He secured a hidden loft in Soho, its brick walls and wide windows offering the perfect raw backdrop. The date was set for 4 weeks away. Invitations would be handwritten, sent only to select editors, influencers, and investors who valued authenticity over flash. The preparation was grueling. Elena worked until her hands blistered, balancing prenatal appointments with endless fittings. Some nights she collapsed onto the floor, crying from exhaustion, only to push herself back up at dawn. Her team admired her perseverance, whispering among themselves that they were witnessing not just the birth of a collection, but the rebirth of a legend. Still, obstacles loomed. A supplier suddenly withdrew fabric orders. Rumor had it, Adrian's people pressured them. A venue inspector nearly shut down the loft after an anonymous complaint. Elena recognized the tactics instantly. Adrian wasn't blind, he had heard whispers and was already trying to sabotage her. But instead of breaking her, his interference fueled her fire. "If he's afraid, that means I'm doing something right," she told Marcus one night, her eyes blazing. The day of the show drew near. Dresses were lined up on racks like soldiers ready for battle. Elena stood in the middle of the loft, her belly full and her heart racing. She looked at her reflection in a full-length mirror. Tired, yes, but radiant with something she hadn't seen in years. Purpose. This was no longer about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming her name, her passion, her dignity. The betrayal that once crushed her was now the very thread stitching her future together. And when the night of the show arrived, Elena Moore would no longer be the forgotten wife. She would be the designer the world could not ignore. The night of the show arrived like a storm brewing on the horizon. The loft in Soho had been stripped down to its bones, leaving exposed brick, polished concrete floors, and wide windows that framed the glittering skyline. Long rows of candles lined the runway, their flickering light casting a golden glow. Guests arrived in sleek black cars, whispers following them as they stepped inside. They weren't here for another corporate gala or a flashy billionaire spectacle. They were here for something rare, something whispered about, but not yet seen. Backstage, Elena stood in a simple black gown of her own design, her belly gently curved, her eyes sharp with determination. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the hem of a model's dress, but her voice was steady. "Walk tall," she told the models. "Every step you take is not just for me, it's for every woman who's been silenced." Her team worked like a small army, pinning fabric, adjusting hair, whispering encouragement. Marcus stood by the entrance, greeting editors and buyers with a smile that hinted at secrets. He had promised to shield her from doubt, but the moment belonged to her alone. As the lights dimmed, silence fell. The first note of music, low, haunting, powerful, echoed through the loft. And then the models began their walk. The first gown was fire red, its fabric flowing like molten lava, symbolizing destruction and rebirth. The audience gasped, leaning forward in their seats. Then came a gold maternity gown, elegant and unapologetic, modeled by a woman visibly pregnant. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was bold, radical, a direct defiance of an industry that often erased women the moment they became mothers. Each piece told a story. Betrayal stitched into resilience, heartbreak sculpted into beauty. Dresses with sharp cuts that sliced through tradition, gowns with hand-sewn embroidery that whispered of survival. The collection was not just fashion, it was testimony. In the front row sat faces that mattered. Editors from Vogue and Harper's Bazaar, investors from Paris, socialites from Milan. They whispered, scribbled, snapped photos, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. Elena, hidden in the wings, felt her chest tighten. "They see me," she thought. "For the first time in years, they see me." But the shock of the night wasn't just for the fashion world. Toward the middle of the show, as a model stepped out in a breathtaking gown of midnight blue, Elena caught sight of a familiar figure slipping into the back of the loft. Adrian Colton. He wasn't on the guest list, but of course, men like him didn't need one. Cassandra clung to his arm, her smile sharp as a blade, but even she couldn't hide her unease as the audience erupted in applause after each design. Adrian's eyes locked on the runway, then darted to Elena, standing at the edge. For the first time in their marriage, she didn't flinch under his gaze. She stood taller, stronger, the soft woman he once dismissed, now replaced by a force he couldn't control. His jaw tightened, his hand clenching into a fist as the realization dawned on him. Elena was not broken. She was rising, and the world was watching. The finale arrived. A gown of pure white silk, embroidered with fiery gold phoenixes, modeled by Elena herself. The room went silent as she stepped onto the runway, her belly proudly visible beneath the glowing fabric. She walked slowly, each step a declaration that she was not a victim, but a survivor, not forgotten, but unforgettable. When she reached the end of the runway, the room erupted in thunderous applause. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even wiping tears. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment. Alina Moore reclaimed her name. And in the corner, Adrian Colton, once the man who held her life in his hands, sat frozen, clapping reluctantly, forced to applaud the woman he had tried to erase. The wife he betrayed had just become the designer the world would never forget. By sunrise, New York was buzzing with one name, Alina Moore. The show that had begun in a quiet loft with only a handful of editors and investors had become the headline across every major outlet. Phoenix Rises, Alina Moore's stunning collection ignites fashion world. From betrayed wife to visionary designer. The rebirth of a woman. Photos of Alina walking the runway in her white Phoenix gown flooded social media. Fashion bloggers called it the most authentic debut of the decade. Influencers replayed clips of the pregnant designer taking her bow as the audience rose in applause. What should have been a small, intimate showcase had turned into a cultural moment. And in every article, in every whisper, there was an unspoken truth. Adrian Colton's betrayal had birthed a legend. In her penthouse, Alina sat at the dining table with a mug of tea, scrolling through the coverage. For the first time in months, she smiled. A genuine smile that reached her tired eyes. She wasn't naive. She knew this was only the beginning, that harder battles lay ahead. But for one precious morning, she allowed herself to feel proud. Her baby kicked softly, as if applauding with the world. Meanwhile, across the city, Adrian's office boiled with tension. He slammed the morning paper onto his desk, his face red with fury. Cassandra hovered nearby, pretending not to be rattled, but her trembling hands betrayed her. The photo on the cover showed Alina radiant, triumphant, her belly wrapped in silk embroidered with phoenixes. The caption read, "The woman who rose from the ashes." "This is a joke," Adrian snarled. "They're making her into some kind of hero. She's nothing without me." But the truth was more dangerous than his anger. Investors had begun calling, not to congratulate him, but to ask about Alina. Was she connected to Colton Industries? Would her fashion line be backed by his resources? Adrian stammered, refusing to admit that not only had he abandoned her, but she had built it all without him. His carefully crafted image as the untouchable mogul was cracking. Cassandra tried to soothe him. "She got lucky. It's just one show. The hype will fade." But even she knew it was more than luck. She had been there, in the loft, and had seen the way the audience leaned forward, the way editors whispered Alina's name with reverence. Cassandra felt a pang of fear. If Alina continued to rise, where would that leave her? By midday, Marcus called Alina with news that cemented her comeback. "Paris wants you," he said simply. "They've invited you to show at Fashion Week next season." Alina's breath caught. Paris was the dream, the pinnacle of every designer's ambition, and it was hers. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "We did it." That evening, as more headlines spread, Adrian's fury turned to desperation. He made phone calls, pulling strings, trying to sabotage her suppliers, to block her invitations. But it was too late. The momentum was unstoppable. Alina's story wasn't just fashion. It was human. Every betrayed woman, every silenced dreamer, saw themselves in her. In the quiet of her studio, Alina looked over her sketches for the future. She no longer felt like the woman begging for scraps of love. She was a creator, a fighter, a mother, and a rising star. And while Adrian scrambled to control the narrative, the world had already chosen its heroine. And it was Alina Moore. Adrian Colton was not a man who accepted defeat. Watching Alina's name climb the headlines while his own reputation slipped into whispers of ridicule was unbearable. He had spent his life building an empire, and in one night the woman he discarded had turned herself into a symbol of resilience. To him, it wasn't just humiliating, it was war. In the days following her fashion show, Adrian called meeting after meeting with his legal team, his PR staff, and trusted executives. His orders were sharp and cruel. Find out who's backing her. Find out where her funding comes from, and if you can't find it, make it up. He slammed his fist on the conference table. "I want Alina Moore destroyed before Paris. Do you hear me? Destroyed." Cassandra sat beside him, her manicured nails tapping against her wine glass. She tried to mask her anxiety with a smirk. "Darling, you're overreacting. It was one show. People love a sob story, but they'll move on." But Adrian wasn't convinced. He had seen the look in the investors' eyes when they asked about Alina. He had heard the hesitation in his partner's voices. They were curious about her, inspired by her, and that threatened everything. His first move was sabotage. Through intermediaries, Adrian pressured fabric suppliers to cut ties with Alina. One by one, calls began to come into her studio. "I'm sorry, Miss Moore, we can't continue our contract." The excuses were vague. Unforeseen shortages, overbooked capacity. But Elena knew whose hand was behind it. When that didn't slow her down, Adrian escalated. He leaked false rumors to the press that Marcus was only helping her because of a secret affair, that Elena's pregnancy was a publicity stunt, that her designs were plagiarized from an obscure European house. Tabloids picked up the stories, splashing them across pages with cruel headlines. Elena read them with trembling hands, her stomach tightening with stress. Her team looked at her with worried eyes, but Marcus told her firmly, "Don't you dare let him win. Rumors fade. Talent doesn't." Adrian's next weapon was legal. His attorneys filed a motion claiming that Elena's new brand violated marital property rights, that because she had been married to him while developing her skills, he had partial ownership of her work. It was a desperate, outrageous claim, but it was enough to drag her into court, to stall her progress, to drain her energy. In the courtroom, Adrian wore the same smug smile he always did, as if convinced the system would bend to him. But this time, Elena didn't cower. She stood in front of the judge, belly full and eyes sharp, and said, "These designs are mine. My work, my vision, my future. He may have tried to silence me, but he does not own me." Her words echoed in the chamber, sending a ripple through the gallery. For a moment, Adrian faltered. He hadn't expected her to fight back with such fire. But his pride hardened again. "Enjoy your little victory," he whispered as they left the courthouse. "Paris will never let you in. I'll make sure of it." Elena walked past him without flinching. For the first time, it was clear. Adrian wasn't in control anymore. He was panicking, scrambling, desperate. And the more he fought, the more the world began to see him not as a powerful mogul, but as a man terrified of the woman he betrayed. And Adrian Colton had good reason to fear, because Elena Moore's rise was only just beginning. The weeks following Adrian's legal ambush could have crushed Elena. The tabloids had their feast, splashing her face across covers with headlines like "Billionaire's Wife or Fraud" and "Pregnancy Publicity Stunt." Reporters lingered outside her building, shouting cruel questions whenever she stepped out for air. Suppliers she had trusted for fabric canceled contracts one after another. To the outside world, it looked like she was cornered, a fragile woman in over her head. But Elena had already survived something far worse, the night of betrayal. Compared to that, gossip and sabotage were just noise. She gathered her team in the studio one morning, her swollen belly leading the way as she stood in front of racks of half-finished gowns. The mood was heavy. Her assistants avoided her eyes, afraid to voice what they all feared, that Adrian was winning. But Elena's voice cut through the silence with surprising strength. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "He thinks he can scare us. He thinks he can break us with rumors and lawyers. But he's wrong. This is bigger than Adrian Colton. This is about proving that we don't need his world to survive. We will finish this collection. We will go to Paris. And when we do, the applause will drown out every lie he's tried to tell." Her words lit a fire in the room. Heads lifted, eyes brightened, and one by one her team nodded. Marcus leaned against the wall, arms crossed, hiding a smile. He had seen many designers rise and fall, but Elena's resilience was something rare, born not from ambition, but from survival. With suppliers cutting her off, Elena had to improvise. She turned to small local fabric shops, sourcing scraps and remnants others dismissed as useless. She stitched them together into bold patchwork designs, transforming limitation into innovation. The dresses looked raw, defiant, like living metaphors of her journey, broken pieces reborn into something extraordinary. When a gossip magazine accused her of copying another designer, Elena refused to issue a defensive statement. Instead, she invited a journalist into her studio, showing them her process, her sketches, her hand-stitched seams. The article that came out the next week flipped the narrative. Colton sabotage backfires. Elena Moore proves her work is original. At night, when exhaustion threatened to break her, Elena found strength in the smallest moments. She would run her fingers over her belly and whisper to her unborn child, "We're almost there. Paris is waiting for us. Each kick, each flutter reminded her why she couldn't quit. Meanwhile, invitations for Paris Fashion Week loomed closer. Other designers scoffed at the idea of a newcomer making an impact. Adrienne pulled strings to have her blacklisted, but whispers about her Soho show had already spread internationally. Editors wanted to see the woman who had walked the runway pregnant, unapologetic, and powerful. Curiosity was stronger than sabotage. Marcus brought news one evening that sealed her determination. "You're confirmed for Paris," he said, placing the official letter in her hands. Elena traced the embossed lettering with trembling fingers, tears welling in her eyes. She had made it. Against gossip, against sabotage, against the man who wanted her erased, she was going to Paris. That night, Elena stayed late in the studio, sewing until her fingers bled. The machines hummed, the city glowed outside, and for the first time, she felt unstoppable. She wasn't just surviving Adrienne's attacks, she was thriving because of them. His cruelty had become her fuel. And as Paris awaited, Elena Moore was ready to show the world that from ashes, a phoenix always rises higher. The City of Light had seen countless debuts, but Paris Fashion Week had never witnessed a story like Elena Moore's. From the moment her name appeared on the schedule, whispers filled the fashion world. The betrayed wife? She's showing in Paris? Some laughed, some doubted, but many were curious. Could she really stand beside the legends of couture after only one underground show in New York? The venue was a historic theater near the Seine, transformed into a cathedral of style. Marble columns framed the runway, chandeliers dripped light like melted gold, and the air buzzed with expectation. Journalists from every corner of the globe filled the seats, alongside buyers, celebrities, and critics whose words could make or break a career. Backstage, Elena's hands shook as she adjusted the final dress. She was 8 months pregnant now, her body heavy, her ankles swollen. Every doctor had told her to slow down, to rest, but she refused. This wasn't just a show, it was her rebirth. She looked at her team, the same loyal souls who had stayed when suppliers fled, and whispered, "No matter what happens out there, thank you. You saved me." Marcus stepped forward, his voice calm but fierce. "No, Elena, you saved yourself. Now go show them why." The lights dimmed. Silence fell. A single note of haunting violin pierced the air, and then the first model stepped onto the runway. The audience leaned forward instantly. The opening gown was a masterpiece of black silk, slashed with streaks of crimson, symbolizing wounds turned into power. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Each piece that followed carried the weight of Elena's journey. Metallic gowns stitched from patchwork scraps, symbolizing survival. Flowing white dresses embroidered with phoenixes representing rebirth. Bold maternity pieces, declaring that motherhood was not weakness but strength. The critics scribbled furiously. Camera flashes lit up the room like stars. Murmurs turned into awe. This was not a pity show. This was genius. And then, the finale. Elena herself emerged, radiant, her belly prominent beneath a gown of shimmering gold. The dress flowed around her like molten sunlight, the train embroidered with flames that seemed to dance as she walked. The crowd fell silent. Here was a woman the world had mocked, discarded, written off. And yet here she stood, unapologetic, transformed into living art. Halfway down the runway, Elena caught sight of him. Adrienne had flown to Paris, Cassandra clinging desperately at his side. His eyes widened, his jaw clenched. The same woman he had humiliated in New York was now commanding the Paris stage, and the world was bowing to her. Cassandra's smile faltered as the audience rose to its feet, clapping, cheering, chanting Elena's name. Elena didn't flinch. She walked past them without a glance, head held high, her every step a declaration. "You do not own me. You never did." At the end of the runway, the theater erupted. Applause thundered, cheers echoed, some audience members even wept. Elena bowed, tears shimmering in her own eyes, her hand instinctively resting on her belly. She wasn't just presenting a collection, she was presenting her survival, her strength, her child's future. In that moment, Paris crowned her not just as a designer, but as a symbol. And as Adrienne sat frozen in the shadows, the woman he betrayed became the star the fashion world would never forget. Paris didn't just applaud Elena Moore, it crowned her. By the morning after her show, her face dominated the covers of every major magazine. Phoenix of Paris, read Vogue. Strength in stitches. Elena Moore redefines couture, declared Harper's Bazaar. Social media exploded with clips of her golden gown shimmering under the runway lights, of her pregnant figure walking with pride. Hashtags bearing her name trended worldwide. Overnight, Elena wasn't just a designer, she was a movement. Across the globe, women reposted her photos with captions like, "For every woman who was told she wasn't enough." Survivors of betrayal and hardship wrote messages thanking her for inspiring them. Fashion critics, usually merciless, praised her courage and artistry. The buzz was electric. Buyers from Milan, Tokyo, and Dubai lined up to place orders. Her label Phoenix Wear had gone from a whisper to a roaring fire. In New York, Marcus's phone rang non-stop with offers of collaborations, partnerships, and sponsorships. "The world wants you," he told Elena, showing her the stack of contracts. But Elena, though overwhelmed, kept her focus. "I didn't start this for money or fame," she reminded him softly. "I started this to survive. Everything else is just extra." But while the world celebrated, Adrian Colton's empire began to crack. At first, he tried to spin the narrative, telling reporters he fully supported Elena's success. But the press didn't buy it. Too many insiders whispered the truth, that he had abandoned her while pregnant, that he had flaunted his mistress while Elena stitched her comeback in secret. His image of the charming billionaire husband turned into that of a cowardly betrayer. Stockholders noticed. Distraction became the word buzzing through Colton Industries. Investors began pulling back, wary of his judgment. One board member was even overheard saying, "If he can't control his personal life, how can we trust him with billions?" For a man obsessed with control, Adrian felt it slipping through his fingers. Cassandra didn't help matters. Once the darling on his arm, she now seemed more like a liability. She craved the spotlight, posing for paparazzi, leaking photos, demanding attention. But the public wasn't interested in her anymore. They compared her to Elena and found her wanting. Online comments were brutal. From Mistress to Mess. "She'll never be Elena." Cassandra's smile faded, her grip on Adrian tightening as she realized her fantasy of being adored was unraveling. At home, Adrian raged. He smashed glasses against the wall, shouted at Cassandra, and fired employees at random. He couldn't escape Elena's face, on billboards, on magazine covers, on television segments praising her courage. Every headline felt like salt on his wounds. The woman he had dismissed as fragile had become a global icon, and the more the world loved her, the smaller he felt. Meanwhile, Elena remained grounded. She spent her days in her studio, working tirelessly on her next collection, balancing fittings with prenatal appointments. She gave interviews, always calm and composed, never once speaking Adrian's name. Her silence spoke louder than any accusation. The public adored her for it. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Elena was ascending, her name synonymous with strength and rebirth. Adrian was unraveling, his empire weakened, his reputation mocked, his mistress resented. And as the world leaned closer to Elena's fire, Adrian realized the truth that terrified him most. She no longer needed him. But the world no longer needed him either. The whirlwind of Paris faded into something gentler when Elena returned home. The applause still echoed in her mind. The magazine covers still glowed from store shelves, but none of it compared to the quiet anticipation that now filled her days. She was weeks away from giving birth, and though her body ached and her schedule overflowed, her heart carried a peace she hadn't felt in years. She prepared the nursery with her own hands. Unlike the cold, designer-perfect rooms Adrian once demanded, this nursery was alive with warmth. Soft blankets she had sewn herself lined the crib. Tiny dresses hung in the closet, stitched in bursts of color. On the walls she painted delicate phoenixes, their wings stretching upward as if promising flight. Every detail whispered of love, resilience, and hope. Her team often urged her to rest, but Elena insisted on working until the very end. "Creating keeps me alive," she told Marcus when he begged her to take a break. He finally relented, though his eyes softened with admiration. "You're unstoppable, Elena. I've never seen anything like you." Then, one quiet morning, it happened. A sharp pain, a rush of panic, and within minutes she was in the hospital. Her contractions came fast, each wave reminding her of her strength and her fragility all at once. For hours she fought, sweat on her brow, her hands clutching the rails of the hospital bed. Yet through the exhaustion she whispered to herself, "You've survived worse. You can do this. For both of us." Marcus waited just outside the room, pacing like a nervous father. He wasn't family by blood, but he had become her fiercest protector, refusing to leave until he knew she was safe. When at last the sound of a baby's cry broke through the air, he closed his eyes, relief flooding him. Inside the room, Elena held her newborn daughter against her chest, tears streaming down her face. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, impossibly delicate, impossibly strong. In that moment, the world faded, the betrayals, the rumors, the pain. All that mattered was the weight of this little life, proof that something pure and beautiful had emerged from the ashes of her heartbreak. She whispered, "Welcome to the world, my love. You are my greatest design." The days that followed were unlike anything she had ever known. Sleepless nights filled with soft cries, early mornings bathed in pale sunlight, the steady rhythm of rocking her daughter in her arms. Each moment stitched her back together. Motherhood wasn't easy. It was exhausting, messy, overwhelming. But it was healing. The press, hungry for a glimpse, speculated endlessly. Would Elena disappear to focus on her child? Would her career pause? But Elena quietly proved them wrong. She balanced late-night feedings with early morning sketches, cradling her baby in one arm while pinning fabric with the other. Her strength, once doubted by everyone, now grew undeniable. When Marcus visited one evening, he found her rocking her daughter in the nursery, the phoenix murals glowing in the lamplight. "You've changed," he said softly. Elena smiled through tired eyes. "No, Marcus, I've finally found myself again." She kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered a promise that carried into the night. "You will never know weakness. You will know strength because you will see it in me." And in that quiet triumph, Elena discovered the greatest revenge was not success alone. It was love, reborn in the arms of her child. For months, Adrian had watched Elena rise higher and higher, and it gnawed at him like a disease. Her Paris triumph, her magazine covers, her quiet strength as a new mother. It all made him look small. His investors whispered her name more than his, and even Cassandra, once smug in her role as his mistress, had grown restless, comparing herself bitterly to the woman she thought she had replaced. Adrian could no longer ignore it. He needed to remind the world who he was, and he decided to do it in the most public way possible. The perfect stage arrived with the annual New York Philanthropy Gala, a night where the city's elite gathered for charity and spectacle. Adrian made sure his name was attached to the event, plastered on every banner, every program. He would reclaim the spotlight. But what he hadn't counted on was that Elena, now an icon in her own right, had also been invited. Not as his wife, not as his shadow, but as a celebrated designer. The ballroom glittered with gold and crystal, the air buzzing with chatter and the clink of champagne glasses. When Elena arrived, wearing a flowing gown of deep emerald silk from her own line, all eyes turned. Whispers followed her like a trail of fire. "She looks radiant." That's Elena Moore, the phoenix herself. She walked with quiet confidence, her daughter safely at home, her heart stronger than ever. Adrian spotted her instantly. Rage and panic twisted inside him as he saw the crowd gravitating toward her, leaving him and Cassandra to simmer in the corner. Cassandra hissed in his ear, "She's stealing the night. Do something." Fueled by ego and desperation, Adrian clinked his glass, calling for attention. The room hushed. With his trademark smirk, he said loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome my ex-wife, Elena. After all, none of this would exist without me. Her success, her little fashion line, it's all thanks to my support." The words landed like poison, and a tense silence followed. Elena's cheeks flushed, but not with shame, with fire. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her eyes locked on his. The crowd leaned in, holding their breath. "Support?" she repeated, her voice clear, steady. "Is that what you call betrayal? Is that what you call leaving your pregnant wife for a mistress?" Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Cassandra's smile collapsed. Elena didn't stop. She held her head high, her voice sharp but controlled. "No, Adrian, my success is not because of you. It is in spite of you. I built Phoenix Wear with my own hands, through sleepless nights, through tears, through strength you never believed I had. And look around you." She gestured to the applauding guests, the flashing cameras. "The world knows the truth now." The applause began slowly, then swelled into thunder. Guests rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. Adrian stood frozen, his face drained of color. Cassandra slipped her arm from his, humiliated, edging away from the cameras that now turned eagerly toward Elena. Elena bowed her head slightly, not in defeat, but in triumph. She had faced him, in public, on his stage, and turned it into hers. She had spoken the truth he tried so hard to bury, and the world had heard it. As the crowd continued to cheer, Adrian realized the nightmare. He had handed her the perfect platform to bury him. And from that night forward, Adrian Colton was no longer the man who defined Elena Moore. He was the man destroyed by her rise. The days after the gala were a blur of headlines. Clips of Elena's confrontation with Adrian went viral, replayed on every news channel, dissected in articles, and shared millions of times online. For the first time, the world had heard her voice unfiltered, unbroken. She had not just defended herself, she had declared her truth. People cheered her courage, but Elena knew the true symbol of her triumph was waiting at home in the nursery. Her daughter, Ava. Late one evening, after yet another flood of interview requests, Elena sat rocking Ava in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, her soft breath steady against Elena's chest. In the quiet of that moment, Elena realized that all the applause, all the headlines, all the praise meant nothing compared to this. The life she held in her arms. Ava wasn't just her daughter. She was proof that love could grow even from betrayal, that hope could be born from heartbreak. When Marcus visited the next morning, he found Elena sketching with Ava nestled in a sling against her chest. "You're unstoppable," he murmured, shaking his head. Elena smiled softly. "No, Marcus, I just have the best reason to keep going." Soon after, Elena received an invitation that surprised even her. She was asked to be the keynote speaker at a global women's empowerment summit in New York. At first, she hesitated. Speaking publicly about her pain felt overwhelming. But then she thought of Ava, of the millions of women who had written letters saying her story gave them hope. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every woman silenced, every dream dismissed. The night of the summit, Elena stepped onto the stage in a simple white dress, elegant yet unpretentious. The auditorium was filled with thousands, but her voice was calm. She spoke about her past, the betrayal, the humiliation, the despair. But then she spoke about resilience, about finding strength in the ashes, about how her daughter had become her guiding light. Halfway through her speech, a murmur swept through the crowd. Elena paused, then turned. At the side of the stage, a caregiver carefully wheeled out a stroller. Ava was there, blinking at the bright lights, her little hands reaching upward. The audience gasped, then softened into silence. Elena lifted her daughter into her arms, holding her against her chest. "This," Elena said, her voice breaking with emotion, "is my greatest creation. Not the gowns, not the shows, not the brand. She is the reason I refuse to break. She is proof that we are stronger than the pain that tries to define us. For her, I chose to rise. And for every woman here tonight, you can rise too." Tears filled the eyes of women across the auditorium. Some stood, clapping. Others cried openly, embracing the women beside them. The applause swelled until it was deafening, but Elena barely heard it. All she felt was the weight of Ava in her arms, warm and alive, her symbol of hope made flesh. Backstage afterward, Marcus whispered, "You've done more than win tonight. You've healed." And Elena, her eyes brimming with tears, finally believed it. In that moment, the applause wasn't just for her. It was for every woman who had ever been broken, and every woman who chose to rise again. For years, Adrian Colton believed himself untouchable. His empire stretched across continents, his face graced magazine covers, his words moved markets. But arrogance has a way of planting seeds of destruction. And now, those seeds bore fruit. The first cracks appeared quietly. Investors pulled out of projects, citing instability. Stock values slipped, then plummeted. Whispers of mismanagement and shady deals began surfacing, whispers Adrian had spent years burying with money and charm. But this time, no amount of charm could save him. The press no longer adored him. The world had turned its gaze elsewhere, toward the phoenix rising from his ashes. Board members, once his loyal allies, grew restless. "He's distracted," one complained. "This obsession with his ex-wife is costing us millions." Another added, "He's become a liability. The brand can't survive tied to his scandals." Meetings turned cold, votes shifted, and Adrian found himself cornered in the very boardroom he had once commanded. At home, things were no better. Cassandra, once smug and glamorous at his side, began to unravel under the weight of public scorn. She had wanted to be adored, but instead she was ridiculed. The press dubbed her the mistress who lost. Online comments cut like knives, comparing her desperation to Elena's dignity. Fights between her and Adrian erupted daily, screaming matches that ended with slammed doors and shattered glasses. Desperation drove Adrian to recklessness. He tried to sue Elena again, this time for defamation, claiming her public speech at the summit had damaged his reputation. The case backfired spectacularly. In court, Elena's lawyers unveiled a mountain of evidence, emails, recordings, and testimonies from employees Adrian had mistreated. The truth spilled into the public eye: fraud, intimidation, and years of corruption. The courtroom gasped, cameras clicked, and the once powerful mogul was exposed as nothing more than a bully in a tailored suit. The final blow came from his own board. In a historic vote, Adrian Colton was ousted as CEO of Colton Industries. Security escorted him out of the glass tower he had built, cameras capturing every humiliating second. The man who had once strutted into galas with champagne in hand now walked with his head down, his empire gone, his name tarnished. News outlets relished the fall. From billionaire to bankrupt, the Adrian Colton collapse, the price of betrayal. Talk shows mocked him. Comedians turned his story into punchlines. For a man who lived on the adoration of others, the humiliation was unbearable. Meanwhile, Elena's star only burned brighter. Every headline about Adrian's downfall mentioned her name, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the woman who had risen above him. She didn't celebrate his collapse. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than his screams. Cassandra left soon after, vanishing into the same shadows she had once clawed her way out of. Without Adrian's wealth and status, she had no reason to stay. She left him with nothing: no company, no reputation, no love. One evening, Adrian sat alone in a dark apartment, the clinking of ice in a glass his only company. He flipped through channels, every station showing Elena's latest triumph. Her smile filled the screen, radiant, powerful, untouchable. He hurled the remote against the wall, but it didn't change the truth. The world had chosen its victor. And Adrian Colton's name would forever be remembered, not for his empire, but for the day it crumbled beneath the rise of Elena Moore. Months after Adrian's fall, the world looked very different for Elena Moore. What began as whispers in a Soho loft had become a global fashion empire. Phoenix Wear wasn't just a brand, it was a movement. Her designs appeared on red carpets, in glossy magazines, and on women who had once believed they were invisible. Each gown carried a story, each stitch a declaration that brokenness could become beauty. But Elena's greatest victory wasn't in sales or accolades. It was in the quiet moments, rocking Ava to sleep after a long day, hearing her daughter's laughter echo through the home she had built on her own terms. The woman who once cried on the nursery floor now walked with unshakable strength, her daughter always at her side. The world demanded more from her: more interviews, more shows, more speeches. And Elena gave, but always with authenticity. She spoke not as a celebrity, but as a survivor. When invited to Harvard to speak to young women about resilience, she stood on the stage, her voice steady. Your worth is not defined by who leaves you, but by what you choose to build from the ashes they leave behind. The audience, packed with students, mothers, and dreamers, erupted in applause. Marcus, ever her ally, continued to guide her career, but now with a different kind of respect. He no longer saw her as someone he had saved, but as a leader in her own right. You don't need me anymore, he joked one evening as they toasted champagne after another successful show. Elena smiled softly. Everyone needs someone. You believed in me when I didn't. That will never be forgotten. Adrian, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. His name appeared only in cautionary tales, business schools dissecting his downfall as a lesson in arrogance and betrayal. Occasionally, a reporter would try to bait Elena into commenting on his collapse. She always responded with grace. His story isn't mine anymore. I'm focused on the future. And with that, she closed the chapter for good. Her final triumph came at the Global Fashion Summit in Milan, where she was honored with the Designer of the Year award. The grand stage glittered with lights as she walked forward, Ava, now a chubby-cheeked toddler, clutching her hand. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, not just for the gowns she had created, but for the journey she embodied. Elena stood at the podium, her daughter on her hip, and spoke the words that would define her legacy. I was told I was weak. I was told I was finished. I was told I was nothing without a man beside me. But tonight I stand before you as proof that none of those things were true. To every woman who has been betrayed, silenced, or broken, this is your reminder. You are stronger than you know. You are not defined by your scars, but by the fire you create from them. Rise. Always rise. The applause shook the hall, people weeping openly, inspired by the sight of a woman who had turned pain into power. Elena kissed Ava's forehead, her eyes shining with tears of gratitude. Her journey was complete. Not because she had destroyed Adrian, but because she had rebuilt herself into someone even she once thought impossible. The betrayed wife was gone. In her place stood Elena Moore, mother, designer, survivor, and symbol of hope. So, that's the end of our story. My friends, you're still here with me, aren't you? If you've stayed until now, it means something in this journey has touched your heart in its own quiet way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, or maybe it whispered that you, too, are stronger than you think. Elena's story isn't just about betrayal and revenge, it's about healing, resilience, and discovering that your worth is never defined by someone else. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them." Elena chose to rise, and so can you. If life has ever broken you, remember, scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof that you survived. Like Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." The obstacles, the heartbreak, the betrayals, they can all become the very fire that shapes you into who you're meant to be. So, if this story spoke to you, do me one favor. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to our channel. Because together, we'll keep telling stories that heal, inspire, and remind us we can always rise again.